Welcome to this Voxeurop Live on the political situation in Georgia with journalist Irma Dimitradze and Hans Gutbrod, academic, and thanks for joining. Before introducing and thanking our guests for today's conversation, we'd like to very warmly thank Voxeurop subscribers and shareholders for their support. It enables us to keep hosting such events, keep translating and publishing quality journalism, throughout investigations, great cartoons, and last but not least, stay independent. This event is in partnership with Pulse, a European project we are proud partners of. Note that we are recording this event. The video will be available on our website within a few days. And you can start writing your questions in the chat in the language of your choice. We will translate them. We will activate your microphone about 15 minutes or so before the end, so you'll be able to have an informal chat with our guest. We have a tradition at Voxeurop. Please write in the chat box where you're based currently. I am Catherine André, editorial director and co-founder of Voxeurop, and I'm based today in Paris.
Hello, I'm Gianpaolo Accardo, editor-in-chief and co-founder of Voxeurop, and I'm currently also in Paris.
For over a year, Georgians have been taking to the streets every night to protest against the increasingly authoritarian tendencies of the pro-Russian Georgian Dream party-led government, accused of steering the country away from its European path and rapidly implementing the illiberal playbook at work in Russia, Belarus, and other countries in the regions. The executive is secretly controlled by the country's richest man, billionaire Bidzina Ivanishvili. The opposition is being silenced, journalists imprisoned, the media and civil society subjugated, and elections rigged. Yet Georgians continue to express their desire to escape Moscow's embrace and their attachment to Europe and its values.
We will discuss this with Georgian journalist Irma Dimitradze and Hans Gutbrod, an academic whom we are particularly happy to have with us today. Irma, you're a journalist who works at Batumelebi Net Gazeti, Mzia Amaghlobeli's newspapers, and you're just back from a long trip in Western Europe, where, among other things, you collected the Sakharov Prize on behalf of Batumelebi's founder, Mzia, who I remember is detained since last January. And Hans, you're an academic and consultant in policy research. You've been working in the Caucasus region since 1999, and you're currently a teacher, a professor at Tbilisi's Ilia State University. You are also running the Transparify initiative on increasing transparency, which is one of your, let's say, most important activities. So let's start. Catherine?
Yes. First of all, maybe you can say where you're based today, Irma and Hans.
I'm based in Batumi, and I'm connecting from Batumi also. So, hello from Batumi, Georgia.
I'm normally based in the old town of Tbilisi, but I'm currently calling in from the Black Forest.
Okay, thanks very much to both of you to being with us. And I will start with a rather general question, but I think for the audience, it's nice to maybe describe in a few words to start with how would you describe the present political and social situation in Georgia? So the question is to both of you. So Irma, maybe if you want to start.
I think from general point of view, Hans would better describe. I think my view would be on the media, but it also quite tells a lot about the general situation, because now we live in the times where there are so many so many pieces of legislation that restrict our work, that even thinking or naming or memorizing them is not possible. And as I said earlier this week when I was in Strasbourg, like, it's really doesn't matter, you learn it, because anything and literally anything you do could become reason for some sort of investigation against you. Would it be criminal, administrative, or so far? It's just about the will when they want to knock on your door and take you away. And there is impunity of highest level when it comes to crimes against and violence against the journalists. There have been a number of journalists beaten so badly, even in last year, that some of them required surgery. None of it has been investigated. Even Mzia's case to take, like Mzia is the first female journalist to be imprisoned on politically motivated grounds since Georgia's independence, which is a huge thing. And the Sakharov Prize itself also shows how critical is the situation in Georgia, because this is not something to celebrate, but it is to show, the harshest and the hardest times of Georgia, struggling for democracy or freedoms, just basic human rights and freedoms. If you look into the list of previous laureates, you will see that even like for us, when I today brought in office the Sakharov certificate, the first thing was that my colleague said, may it be the last one that comes in Georgia. So I think roughly this is... But I think is to for a moment stop on this negative note. Because also with the Sakharov, it was Belarus and Georgia, and putting them together. What somebody asked me during the interviews, that what it symbolizes for you that Belarus and Georgia are receiving this award together in one nomination. And I was like, I don't take it as Georgia's situation is as there and as terrible as in Belarus. I would take this as a very good, alert that Belarus is there, Georgia is here, and there is a very, very thin line between them. And Georgia could very easily and quickly become next Belarus. And this award probably is also sort of warning for international community and Georgians also, that we need to do everything to avoid that. And there is a very thin line, to be honest. And we saw that everything went down very quickly, and this thin line could go away also in a matter of, very few days even.
Thank you, Irma. And Hans?
Yeah, I would describe the situation in Georgia, what we have seen over the last 18 months, roughly, as authoritarian assault. I think it's important not to describe it as democratic backsliding. That's a wrong word. Backsliding sounds as if you're trying to push something upward and it slides back, and it takes away the perpetration, that something is being done rather actively, purposefully, and with clear intent. You could say, though, that maybe the word authoritarian isn't even quite the label more for what goes on in Georgia. Why? Typically, authoritarians are keen just to make sure that they seize power. Seize or hold on to power. And what we have going on now, you could describe as really the fourth phase of the Georgian Dream. The first phase was a broad coalition, including some clear pro-Europeans, most of whom are part of the protests right now. Second phase was much more narrowly based, but still going clearly towards Europe. That was until the end of Kaharia's prime ministership. And then the third phase was a kind of lazy status quo with quite a bit of corruption, graft, but broadly it was a status quo party. And now, under Prime Minister Kobakhidze, we have what I would describe a Robespierrean phase, which I would describe as nihilistic authoritarianism. Why is it nihilistic? Because it doesn't really have a positive program. It's about attacking others, dividing the country, undermining institutions, undermining kind of the classical aspects of statehood as the separation of the judiciary from the executive. There's not even a pretense anymore on any of these things. And it's important to emphasize that it's nihilistic because it sets that apart from some other kind of figures that have a particular content of something positive that they want to develop. That is at the moment absent from the Georgian Dream. And what is important is that it really marks a very radical break from what the Georgian Dream was before. Before it was broadly a status quo, pro-westward, but status quo party. Right now, they themselves are radical. And as Irma pointed out, you can barely keep up with all the tsunami of repressive laws that reach really all parts of life. that is not really fully reflected in Western reporting. Some people are aware of the restructuring of education, which is a total shredding. But we've also had things like mental health registers, where in future, if you get treatment for anything that affects your mental health, that's going to be captured in central registry. So it's important to say this is not classical, just holding on to power. It's about remaking society. And that, in my mind, also makes the current venture particularly unstable.
Thanks, Hans. But do you think that this repression of the civil society and these new laws that you mentioned are part of a greater design to redesign a society in a through accomplished dictatorships, or is it just elements to cling on power?
Well, in my sense, the dictatorship is already there. And it's important to say that what happened in Russia over 14 years or so in Georgia essentially happened over a couple of months. And as Irma pointed out, I mean, you can barely keep up with all the peoples that get jailed for 2 weeks, but then are under threat to be jailed for a year, or opposition leaders who initially get jailed for 7 months, but might be in for a decade. So that is already here. My own sense is that there's a mix of strategic, somewhat the idea that you need to grab onto all power, but also that there's escalating paranoia. And as I've said elsewhere, that what we see is that Prime Minister Kobakhidze has decided that to set himself apart from his predecessors, most of which ended up relatively unhappily in one way or the other. He isn't going to try and slow down Bidzina Ivanishvili. He isn't going to try and convince him to that some of his suspicions may be exaggerated, but he's decided to amplify the paranoia. So you cannot make a paranoid person more reasonable, but you can make a paranoid man more paranoid. And that explains what we've been seeing in Georgia right now, that at any point where Ivanishvili, who's embittered by people, as he feels, betraying him, letting him down, he amplifies all of these sentiments. And for that reason, we see the swathe of attack across essentially every sector of society.
If I may. So I think the thing is that for Ivanishvili, when I think of him, I see, and he is oligarch, and he's a man who cares the most about his power and money. And it seems like, because he did also lead this party towards on the more, somewhat Western European path, right? And we got the, visa liberalization, which they, made a big fuss of it, and propaganda that we are leading Georgia towards Europe and so on and so on. But I think we should not underestimate the role of 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine and how things changed. I think it was just a man with a big money sitting there with calculator and trying to calculate which has better chances of being the winning part of this. Is it going to be a West, or is it going to be Putin? And what is the best for me? How do I get the best benefit out of it? The part of it is that he has treated Georgia as his private LLC, I don't know, limited liability company or whatever, because it also was very well shown how he brought the people from his businesses into the state, positions, right? His manager, his lawyer, even from someone from his security guards and so on. So he does treat Georgia as his company, but how he made this big change towards Russia and drift, or whatever we call it, it was basically on the calculation and assessment that he believed that Europe is quite weak, and he could Putin had more chances, and he could play a game where he appears more pro-Russian, or appears to be someone who pleases Russians at least more. We get, I think, almost every week there is some Russian coming out and praising Georgian Dream's decisions, right? This is what he has been trying, and all the repressive legislations and everything that he's doing, or the statements are coming, it shows that. So I do see this part of bigger picture. I don't even believe, even if we had very strong opposition, how much chances we would have to escape that, because his power is not based on people loving him, but on the propaganda and fear and terror that he has been developing in the people, saying that, okay, Russia is going to invade us. Europe is not doing enough for Ukraine and so on. So this fear is there. I think this is the fear which is which is helping them to, stay in power regardless all this insane, sometimes even, laughable legislations and their pressures and whatever they are doing, because there are a number of legislations which they were not even able to fully implement, to start arresting people under those charges or so on and so on, but they are still continuing doing that. So keeping the what do you call it? Like, so there is always something happening on news. People are overwhelmed with it and getting fatigued and then stopping to watch it. So this propaganda, we should, it's necessary to see it. It's raw and it's there. I really think that if people would see that the things are changing, and unfortunately the current global situation is not helping, because the talks about the Ukraine negotiations were also used very much by the GD, and anything, even small steps made, they are just using for increasing that fear and this frustration with Europe.
Yeah, Irma, thanks. Regarding the press and freedom of the press in particular, what is the situation right now?
Yeah, the situation is that it's really basically criminalized to be a journalist. I mean, independent journalist, to be a journalist who is not doing the propagandist work. And even though if there was a, independent and unbiased investigative body looking through all the legislations, they could have dozens of grounds and reasons to arrest any journalist in Imedi TV, which is propagandist TV, or others, because these legislations is creating that situation. Financially, it's terrible, because basically receiving any sort of foreign funding criminalizes you, so it's impossible to do so. We are trying to, raise the money locally. There are like over 20 online media outlets which are independently owned, small, very good, some regional, some national ones. They have united and running this campaign, which is called "The Lights Must Stay On." It is collecting some, but it is really difficult. So I often say that today in Georgia, journalism is not a job anymore. Like, there is no job, such a job that you go in the morning and do your job, finish it at 6, and then you get paid. This has become like very much mission, and it is not exaggerated at all, because there were months and there are journalists who are unable to receive their salaries, who were in some TVs, there were journalists who were openly made statements that like they wanted to continue, but it was not only about receiving the salary, but they had their children, their some responsibilities, that their savings went off, like they spent all of it and they couldn't support the job itself to keep it. They were forced to leave to get some other job in the service to continue living. So this is the situation. There were several journalists who were detained and ordered to administrative detentions. I think 5 days, 10 days, something like that. There was no more than 15 days. Hans, if I'm wrong, please correct me, but I think it was after 15 days. Mostly it was TV formulas, one of 2 remaining critical TV channels journalists. And TV Pirelli also. I heard from TV channels that they have really tough situation, because more or less for online media, it's still easier to continue operating. Like, even if you don't have office, you can work from home and this and that. But when you don't have studios, you don't have money for the cameraman and so on. This is very difficult. Like when I was in Strasbourg, former TV journalist wanted to get the interview, and she was filming with phone, and she told me that before they always she always used to have cameramen, and she's Brussels-based and covering that way the events in the European Parliament and other European bodies. Now they could no longer afford it. So I heard that some of the media outlets also have problems with paying the utility bills. So it is quite dire situation, but I have not heard that anybody is physically planning on relocation. I mean, going in exile. So, and there was no, some of the media outlets actually received the court order to submit the information, some personal information under the, I think it was foreign grant laws under that, if I'm not wrong, or FARA. But they obviously appealed this court order, and still it is going for back and forward. They are not making moves. We are also in a situation where we're like, okay, who are they going to arrest next? Is it going to be Georgian of Tisanbebi? Is it going to be Lika? Or I don't know. This is the situation. This is the situation right now. So.
Thank you, Irma. We said it before, Georgians have been on the street a lot. So you just described the situation for journalists, but more maybe generally speaking, are Georgians not discouraged by the level of repression? And would you say they're still determined to fight for democracy, whatever? So maybe Hans first this time.
Yeah, I think it's important to look beyond Rustaveli and the protests on Rustaveli. And of course, the situation is such that if you know that you can face a fine of 5,000 lari, people think, is it worth this particular evening to stop by at the protests if, let's say, you don't have a scarf? But even if you wear a scarf, you could also be for hiding your face. You could have that. So if the numbers on any given evening might not be a huge groundswell of opinion, I don't think that's reflective of the regime having been able to put the country back on track. We're now nearing 400 days of continuous protests. What I think people are outside beyond that focus on Rustaveli, which is, of course, draws a lot of attention because it's very visual, it's very vivid, that there are really kind of 4 tracks that one needs to work on. One is piercing the propaganda bubble. And that is possible because unlike some of the other far extremist parties, I think the Georgian Dream right now is extremist. It is in that category. But unlike some of its brethren, it doesn't respond to a real concern. There isn't, let's say, immigration, which drives a lot of far-right discourse. That doesn't exist. So piercing the propaganda bubble is one thing. Disabling particular enablers is possible, has been done, continues to be done, is a second prong. Third, disrupting GD decision-making is a particular emphasis that people need to look at. And then fourth, reviving political hope, reviving the idea that politics can offer an alternative. And of course, the continuous repressive assault where every week there's something to deal with makes it hard for people that are in politics. As I've often said, I don't think we should use the word the opposition because it suggests a unity that does not, a negative form of unity almost, that everything is the same. This is not the case. There's an opposition spectrum that stretches across a range of groups that are really, really dissatisfied with what's going on and that are active in that space. And they need to also re-articulate the message that Georgia could be a normal country. This could be a place where you actually try and solve problems. This could be something where you could actually try and make sure that nurses earn enough money to be able to feed a family. And that celebrating GDP numbers, which primarily means that a handful of people get more Ferraris, get more Porsches, they're all on display in the center of Tbilisi, and the GDP numbers might be something to boast about. But the inability to help ordinary people live a proper life where they can feed their family, that's an ongoing and pressing issue. And bringing this back into the discussion that will be important. It's going to be hard because the battle in the end is about attention. It's about attention, and being in a constant mode of assault, of course, makes it possible for people just to kind of get tired, get exhausted. My own view is, yes, this is real. It's going to get worse, that level of exhaustion. But at the same time, the fundamental problems that Georgia faces and that ordinary Georgians are facing, we've had almost 1% of the population emigrate in some of the recent years. And these problems, they're real, and the current approach of Georgian Dream is just not capable of addressing any of these problems. And so we're going to lurch from crisis to crisis. And I think as soon as people, including many people that are right now in the apparatus, in the bureaucracies, they're very unhappy with the way things are going. They signed up for the Georgian Dream as a status quo party. They didn't sign up for that rampage. And Robespierre is not, Irakli Koubakhidze is not popular in his own party. The moment that people see that there's a credible alternative, I think we'll also see a much more profound crisis. And this is where the focus needs to be at this point.
Okay, thank you, Hans. Irma, do you want to add something? And please, if you want to write questions in the chat, we will ask them for you.
I think the question about whether there is a protest still remaining, short answer is yes, but also we should understand that protest remains in many different forms, not only on the main avenue of the capital or some streets of other cities, which also see this daily protest stagings, but also I think it is very powerful how the political prisoners are expressing their political protest from there. For example, yesterday, actor, very famous Georgian actor who is already, I think, more than a year political prisoner, he wrote a letter saying that he refused to sign early release documents or any pardons. And this is the spirit of many others. They don't see personal freedom as important. They see that this is justice and the freedom should be shared and public, and they continue their fight. So as if they would be standing on Rustaveli every day, they continue their protest from there. And this is very powerful. Like journalists who remain in the profession and are doing, this is also their struggle and their protest. And there are many others. So in many different forms, this continues. And again, I want to stress on that. I don't believe, I'm 100% sure that this regime doesn't have support at all. It stands on the fear, on propaganda, and the moment they see that it is fully made up and fully non-realistic, and they see that there are real actions. Europe is doing whatever it's promising. It's acting, I don't know, it's not only words and beautiful statements. I think there will be more encouragement within the country also, because we should not forget this is still a country which has its territories occupied, which doesn't see a year without citizens being killed on the occupation line. So this trauma should be, accordingly treated, and therefore the propaganda influence and impact assessed accordingly.
Did both of you noted that the Georgian protesters, and let's call it, okay, we shouldn't call it the Georgian opposition, but let's say the democratic movements in Georgia, do they feel that they have support from other European countries and citizens in other European countries? And if so, which ones? Including also the European Union, of course.
It's about Georgians. I will go first, Hans, if I may. There is some frustration, to be honest, and it's also normal to have, but there are some steps that are seen and well received. I think this award recently was some of small encouragement for that, but mostly I think most effective countries who actually showed actions were the Baltic ones. Even if it is very small gesture and it is, travel ban for perpetrators of those human rights violations, or the judges who are, delivering the decisions fully politically motivated, this also means something. And we expect, and at least we want to see more of it, because if with one hand you want to create supporting system for example, independent media and support the democracy in the country, and you are trying to come up with some projects. And on the other hand, you do nothing, and the propaganda is huge TV channels which have the money coming from UK, EU countries, like, I don't know, huge amounts, and they are everywhere. They are infiltrating every, every part of the society. They are reaching everyone everywhere. Then it's really the question, are you really helping? Like, is this support for independent media helping? Because there is this which is burying me alive under this algorithms, everything reaching everywhere, and that my voice is still not heard, whatever I'm trying, even if I die on the protest while covering. So there are some steps that we wish to see more active and more bold.
It's inconsistent, so to speak, what one has seen from Europe as a whole. On the one hand, sometimes the messaging is all over the place. There are announcements, they're not really followed through, they're strong letters, strongly worded, and then one doesn't really see any action. And those letters don't seem to be particularly targeted at having an impact. And so this creates, in my mind, a broader question that I don't think, by the way, I've said, I don't think we, whoever the we is, have lost Georgia. I think that is very much still, it's an open contest. But I think the question Europe needs to ask itself is whether it's at risk of losing itself. Because what Georgia shows is that when Europe is under attack, including European diplomats who are being vilified, defamed, sometimes put into a situation where even their personal security may be under question, there isn't really a meaningful response. And so the question is there anyone who's actually in charge of trying to win this fight? And if you don't want to win, you're bound to lose. And it's not just about Georgia. And the mindset that I encounter in places, and sometimes in conversations where you said, well, you have these and these instruments. And then the response I get, yeah, but with that, no, we don't really know. Our legal department says, all right, but this is not the time where the lawyers should dictate. There's political leadership. And the law is there to serve the interests, to actually get things done, especially at a time of an existential contest. And it is entirely clear that what we see in Georgia also aims at the heart of Europe, and it aims to teach a lesson that even if you're 80% pro-Europe, we can take all of this apart and we can destroy it all. And so what I see there is something, yeah, I don't doubt the good intention, but it falls significantly short of where the situation is right now. And I think so the situation in Georgia right now is a very stark warning about how much still needs to be done. And I should say again, it starts really with the beginning. You just somehow want to figure out administratively how you're going to respond, or when you are attacked, not because you chose the fight was brought to you. When you are attacked, you want to win and actually secure, not win because you want to fight others down, but because you really believe you have a better answer for citizens, for ordinary people, for their future, that this should be countries, that this should be a community and a grouping that wants to put the citizens in the centers and not a handful of people that enrich themselves at everyone else's expense. And I'm not sure I see that level of seriousness quite yet.
In the context of Putin's goal of dividing and disorientating Europe, insofar as one can tell, how much are Russian intelligence agencies and Putin himself implicated in recent events in Georgia?
I think the present situation shows just how important good journalism and how important good investigative journalism is. Because I think the answer to that has multiple layers. There is a part of that in my mind, is a Russian story. But I think there's also a lot more going on. But to the extent that we have Russian stories, we need really, really good investigative journalism to also really tell that story with precision so that it is compelling and it's believable. Because some of those accounts now don't always get taken seriously. The label was quite widely applied for multiple reasons. But let's take an example of something that OC Media posted recently that showed directly how the husband of the present Georgian ambassador to Washington, D.C., is a person who's a Moscow lawyer, has been practicing in Moscow, who's worked on things that were very close to the government, so that effectively the Georgian-US relationship has a key Russian lawyer, Moscow-based lawyer, looming over that. That was a story that I don't think were particularly keen to be widely known. And again, investigative journalists unpack that. There are other things. There are all sorts of indications that Russian security services can operate quite freely in Georgia. Whether those are incidents that go back to the attempted assassination of Khangoshvili in Tbilisi, the man that was later killed in the Tiergarten in Berlin we now know, by a Russian-sent assassin. Of course, he was caught and then exchanged and then greeted personally by Putin. So there's a story there of an attack also happening in Georgia, almost certainly by Russian-sent perpetrators. And all of this stuff is not really told clearly. And therefore, when the Georgian Dream asserts from time to time that actually they still somehow they're broadly going in that direction, there isn't something so direct to contradict them. So that story, more investigative journalism to really clarify all that's going on. And haven't even talked about sanctions circumvention, kind of money shifted through Georgia, crypto hub, essentially Russian IT companies offshoring into Georgia. This is the one sector of the economy that actually grows strongly. Russian IT companies offshoring into Georgia and then selling into the world through tax advantages. So there's all sorts of stuff going on there. In the end, I think, though, the contest is also internally, and that maybe even another government in Georgia would need to be maybe more multivectoral than everyone might like. That's, I think, is also something that one can consider as a reality. But right now, again, to highlight, there are these self-running paranoiac tendencies that are in play in Georgia. And there's a bit of a risk. If you reduce it Russia versus the West, you end up losing all sorts of texture. You lose the texture that Azerbaijan is not particularly interested in Georgia being entirely under the Russian thumb. Turkey is not interested in Georgia being entirely under the Russian thumb. Central Asia wants the Caucasus as an exit corridor. It loses billions of dollars, many billions of dollars every year, because it's landlocked in the way it is without good exit corridors. And so if you look at the broader geopolitical picture, it's actually not quite as unfavorable as some people would like to portray it, by reducing, Brussels very far, it's busy with itself, and Georgia is essentially, that's simply not the case. The geopolitical situation is overall, when you look at it in nuanced terms, offers many more opportunities. That's complicated to explain in kind of electoral slogan, but those are the realities, and nuanced analysis needs to bring those realities in also.
Thanks, Han. Irma, would you like to add something on this?
I would just physically, Russian troops are really on Georgian soil. If they are physically here, so obviously, even if you don't have any evidence or any suspicion, you know that they are present here and they are trying to infiltrate every aspect and everywhere have their presence. Probably the churches also influence under the Russian influence, and they also have some people in it. But the thing is, I wanted to comment when I absolutely agree with Hans. The situation that we are now in is also because they want us. That's why they want us, journalists, media, everyone who is doing any research, any exploration of these things going on, to be gone, to be busy with their works. Why should I be meeting people advocating for some journalist freedom in Georgia while I could be working on some serious investigative piece? Right now, there is a situation where they are creating all the situation because they want to silence you, because there are these problems, there are this sanctions information and everything happening. And the worst thing is that when I get this question, my hand is exploding, because I want to be working on that. I want to be exposing it. I need some time, physically need time to do that. They are doing it because that's the whole goal and purpose, that you are unable to do and track it.
So there's a question from the audience, from Karl Henrik. He's asking, what would the European additional measures be that would be fitting into the seriousness of the level of the current challenge to the European project, of which Hans spoke earlier? Further sanctions? If so, what kind of sanctions? What else could be done at the European level? I guess, Hans, this one is for you.
Very openly for Hans, I think.
And that's the single most important thing, because then someone's going to be in charge that can actually look at these things. Right now, there are these caravans of discussions here and there, and maybe we could be doing this, maybe we could be doing that. So we need a focal point. Secondly, look at the range of measures that one could undertake in various ways. So could countries in the Schengen zone decide to apply Baltic sanctions in a slightly more forward way? And yes, you can wait for a legal challenge, whether that will be challenged in your country, but that's in the end a decision that a sovereign country should be able to take. That if the Baltics have some sanctions on the books, that you say, well, then traveling into the Schengen zone will maybe stop every third person. That'll have a huge impact. Target the High Council of Justice. These are the people that coordinate. That's essentially the center, the Death Star of the Georgian judiciary. I'll put a link into this. This is the Death Star of the Georgian judiciary. These people deliberately have not put up their names on the English version of their website because they're afraid. And what impact will that have? Look at the broader strategy that I talked about. It will disrupt GB decision-making, because we know that Bidzina Ivanishvili doesn't like paying the third tier a lot of money. And if he needs to go to people and explain that actually you put yourself in harm's way, but you're not really getting any extra money, and because of the new anti-corruption initiatives, you can't really steal anymore either, then it will impact the regime directly. But again, all of this only really works if you don't go around and say, oh, we don't really know what to do. And we're also concerned, it's also terrible. But if you say, this is an attack and we're going to respond, and we're thinking about a range of measures, looking into anti-dumping legislation with regards to the Georgian tax regime, and maybe things aren't going to work, but at the least try. And we don't really see that. We see long faces where people go, oh, we can't do this, we can't do that. And that's not really a response there at all. So I could go into more detail, happy to discuss this kind of one-on-one. I should also say, I mean, there's still Georgian perpetrators getting scholarships, traveling to Europe. There are people just a few weeks ago with a university president, and we know that it's a member of the state security. It should really not be that hard at some point just to lock these things down. And why does it matter? Because a good chunk of people try to present this to themselves inside the Georgian Dream kind of perpetrator force fields along the lines, well, it's not really that bad. Well, it's just a phase. No, look. And to make entirely clear, okay, if this is your choice, fine. But you will no longer travel on an Erasmus plus kind of EU travel grant, while at the same time taking those opportunities away from other Georgian citizens. And again, it starts with at some point someone actually going, we want to do this. And more broadly, if you want behavior change, accumulate the sticks. And I should say on visa liberalization, one of the experiences being there is from June this year, there's a decision from the Foreign Affairs Council. I'll put it in, I might have gotten the name wrong, I put it in the links, that you can target categories of people. The answer you get from bureaucrats is, oh, but it's only some kind of categories of passport holders. Well, no, that is not what the political decision says. But clearly the wrong people are in charge at the moment inside Brussels who discuss this. Because rather than saying, here's a political text, this is what we're going to do. Yes, there's residual risk that you'll be challenged legally, but use it. This is politics. This is an essential contest. And these people look at themselves as get up and look at how can we tie our own shoelaces together before getting up and walking. That's just not what you do. If you want to secure your own survival, the dignity of your own institutions, you really need a different mentality.
What's the position of Georgians on the Russian war in Ukraine? Who would like to start? Irma? or Hans?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned before also that this war, when it started, it was very personal to us. It was not some assault, some neighboring or other country. It was very personal. And we knew from that moment that it was about us also, but we also knew that it was about Europe, which I am not sure if everyone in Europe understands very well. The majority, of course, there is a support. I mean, Ukraine's there is a huge support of Ukraine. I don't know anyone supporting in Georgia to Russia in this. There might be questions about who has more chances of winning, which is fully propaganda what is working on. But the support goes to Ukraine, and also we see not only our existential fight right now, but also Europe's future is very much dependent on what will happen in Ukraine. And it is so much interconnected. You cannot consider any of it separately or isolately. So that's my response. I think even GD cannot say that they don't support Ukraine's victory. Whatever they are saying is like, we want Ukraine to win. However, we see that Europe is not supporting enough, so they are having the chance more of losing than some insane statements. But like, I don't think anyone in Georgia, at least on the territories control under which are controlled by Tbilisi recently, anyone lives who says that they support Russia in this war.
Yeah, it's one of those fields in which actually the GD is quite incoherent. So if you look at old pictures, Slava Papuashvili traveled to Bucha and was visibly shaken by that experience. If you look at Taliashvili's old Facebook posts, she signs a Ukrainian flag. And so this actually is a wedge issue inside, because there are pro-Russian forces inside the Georgian Dream. That
Sorry, Hans,
definitely
who are
is the
these
case.
people
Straight out pro-Russian forces. But if I could add to that, one of the things that in my mind makes the Georgian Dream, again, its rule potentially less stable than it can look from afar, and why this contest is in play, is that if the Ukrainian war was over, even under unfavorable terms for Ukraine, it is far from clear that this would be great for the Georgian Dream. One economist had kind of done the analysis and just shown that the kind of Georgian Dream tax revenues, the tax revenues of the Georgian state went like that. And then with the Ukrainian war, it went like this. And it would be a severe, severe blow for the Georgian Dream if things return back to normal, because then the middle corridor is not so particularly interesting anymore. It just isn't, for multiple reasons. And it'll anyway go, some of the things will go through Sangasur or a trip, or however you want to call it. So again, we're looking at something that in many ways looks quite Russian, but it doesn't have the Russian Siloviki. It doesn't have the Russian gas and oil. It doesn't really have an ideology that stands up in the way that there's centuries of Russian imperialism. And it's really important to watch these things and not throw everything into a kind of, oh, this is one thing of a similar kind of, we're under assault everywhere. No, it's a very, very distinct entity in Georgia. And when you look closely, you see also that some of its aspects are, in my mind, very, very vulnerable.
Yeah, thanks to both. So before we open the mics to the audience, I'd like just to ask a quick question, especially to Irma. So you were in Strasbourg last week to receive the Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought that was awarded to Mzia. So how was that experience, and do you believe that it will help Mzia to get out of prison? And in general, and this to both of you, is there still hope for Georgia to return back to the path to the European Union? And you both said it earlier, but if you have just one idea of what it would need for this to happen.
It was very important. I mean, it was a huge platform given to issue of Georgia, and we were discussing, giving interviews. It was covered by so many, so it was a huge possibility and opportunity for Georgians only. In regards of Mzia's freedom, personal freedom, it would be very much easier for me and for her friends if it was only about getting Mzia out of jail. Unfortunately, it is not on that. She could as well, do the plea bargain, or later she could ask for release on the bracelet, or now the early release topic is coming. she denies that because she stands for justice, and she sees her struggle very much part of all Georgian resistance movements struggles. So I don't really see how much that could play a role in her release per se. But for the cause that we are fighting all, it was a huge platform. Let's see, I tried my best, and if there will be any good results, then that would say that it worked somehow. I saw that there is a frustration a lot among politicians about Georgian opposition parties and their abilities and their unities, and there were questions about it. Obviously, I'm not a politician. I'm not a political expert or analyst, so I don't have the very deep, answers and analysis on that. But my very quick and simple question reaction is that this is authoritarian assault, this is dictatorship, and there are not so. I mean, oppositions don't really have so. Opposition parties or political leaders, don't have this grounds for a fair competition for winning with something. Also, it's very much, again, I would underline that part of the bigger picture, how if Europe is gonna, go a little bit on the winning part, show its strength and power and give some hope or I don't know, some real prospect to Georgians who still believe very much that Europe is and European democracy is going to win rather than Putin, then that would help. And I really believe that whatever bad situation is, I know it may sound weird, but I believe that the moment there is some bold steps made by Europe, I don't know, some actions, some positive developments on Ukraine's front, on the negotiation side, the power, whatever GD relies on, will start decreasing, and it can go very soon. And I believe that it's, even if we sink down the water, like there is this at least this generation, if it doesn't continue over a decade in this stagnation, then there is a possibility to get back very quickly. And I don't think it will take very long time. I mean, again, if it doesn't stagnate and freeze on this situation for many, many years, then we can, get back very quickly. The abolishing all those legislations and getting back will not take long. So it's very much about what Europe will do if it will decide to fight. And as Hans said, fight precisely because it decides that it wants to win.
So if you look at the big picture, when protests started more than a year ago, I think the Georgian Dream was hoping that they were going to be over in a couple of days. We're a year in and they're still there. And yes, of course, not with a momentum of thousands of people every day. But if you look at the big picture, it's pretty stark in what we see there. So what are the key things that will be needed to kind of tip scales? Credible alternative is important. This is a new set of behaviors, and it is normal that this takes time for people to adapt from being in one paradigm, which was challenged, to being in that paradigm of being under continuous assault. This is not unusual. And I should also say about Europe, etc., it's not unusual that this takes time, but you just need to be serious about the task. And so it is an existential test, but it's also a task. And task means it's entirely clear where the focus should be. The focus should be on what you can do, not all the things that you can't do. And I know we often talk about the things we can't do, but there's a lot that's possible. And this is that kind of test, I think, is a good exercise more broadly in terms of thinking about overused word, but resilience and being ready for the future. And with that kind of deeper work and a particular focus, lots of things will come together that right now are often kind of fragmented and all over the place. So I would say it's really important, again, to bear in mind, to look both at the nuances and not give in to the kind of spirals and sometimes abbreviated versions that lack nuance. I think when you bring the nuance back in, you see a more kinetic, you see more how lots of things are indeed in play at the moment.
Thanks everybody for attending and participating in this live event. And thank you so much, Irma and Hans, for being with us today. And many thanks again for our subscribers and shareholders and the Pulse Project who make this possible.